You ever notice how some neighborhoods look peaceful, but you can just feel the tension underneath? Like that awkward silence at a family dinner before someone brings up politics. That was our neighborhood. Beautiful houses, perfect lawns, white fences all lined up like teeth in a too-perfect smile. And right next to it, my land. Open, wide, dusty ranch land that had been here long before the HOA ever showed up. I'd lived here since before the streets even had names. Back when the only rules were, close the gate behind you and don't spook the cattle. But times change. And apparently, so do people. At first, I didn't mind the new development going up next to my property. I figured, hey, more neighbors means more folks to wave at, maybe borrow a cup of sugar from. I didn't think much about it until I saw the sign. Welcome to Silver Creek Estates, a deed-restricted community. You know, that kind of fancy talk that basically means we tell you what color to paint your house. Didn't bother me though. I wasn't in their little HOA bubble. My land was separate old ranch land, private deed, not part of their fancy club. Or so I thought. At first, they mostly kept to themselves. I'd see them walking their dogs, watering their lawns like they were afraid the grass might file a complaint. A few waved at me, some didn't. No big deal. I'd drive by in my truck, a little dusty, sure, and sometimes I'd catch a look or two, like I'd tracked mud into their perfect little world. But then, little by little, the HOA started flexing its muscles. New signs went up, no overnight street parking. Trash bins must be stored out of sight. No livestock or agricultural activity within view. Agricultural activity. I laughed at that one. Like they could control the smell of the wind. Now, I know what you're thinking, why'd you care? You're not even part of their HOA. Exactly. That's what I thought too. But that didn't stop them from acting like I was. They started sending letters. Not to me directly at first, but to the county. Complaints about my fence line, about dust runoff, even about my cattle being unsightly. Unsightly. That's a new one. I ignored it. I figured they'd get tired of wasting ink. But no, they were just warming up. One day, I was out checking the fence near the road when a couple of the HOA board members rolled up in a shiny golf cart. The kind that costs more than a used pickup. The driver, a guy named Greg, had that look, you know, the one people get when they think they're the sheriff of something. He gives me a little nod and says, "Morning. You know, we've been getting some concerns about the road." I said, "What road?" He points down the stretch of gravel that runs along my fence. "This one. It's the main entrance to our community. We're thinking of repaving it soon, just wanted to let you know it'll be under construction for a few weeks." I raise an eyebrow. "You mean my road?" He blinks. "Well, it's the HOA's access road." I grin. "Yeah? You sure about that?" He just stares, a little confused. I could tell right then he had no idea what kind of can of worms he'd just opened. See, what Greg didn't know, what nobody in the HOA knew, was that when the developer built those homes, they never actually bought the strip of land under that road. It was still part of my original parcel. That road, their precious, freshly paved main entrance, technically sat on my property. I hadn't thought much about it in years. The survey lines were old, sure, but still valid. And suddenly, it felt like I was sitting on a goldmine of irony. That night, I sat on my porch with a cold beer, watching their porch lights flicker on one by one. I thought about all the letters, all the complaints, all the ways they'd tried to control things that weren't theirs. And I couldn't help but chuckle. They thought they owned the neighborhood, I muttered to myself. But they never checked who owned the ground beneath their feet. I took another sip, smiled, and leaned back in my chair. See, some folks play checkers. Others play chess. But me? I just read the deeds. And the funny part? The feud hadn't even started yet. Cinematic foreshadowing line. They thought they could tell me what to do until they realized I was the one who decided who even drove through their gate. Final hook. Who decides what belongs in your own driveway? Because soon enough, everyone in Silver Creek Estates was about to find out. You ever wake up to a noise so annoying it feels like it's drilling right into your brain? That was me that morning. At first, I thought one of my cows had escaped again and knocked something over. But no, when I stepped outside, I saw a bunch of orange cones, a shiny yellow steamroller, and about half a dozen guys in neon vests tearing up the gravel road that ran along my fence line. Fresh asphalt, heavy machinery, HOA board members standing around pretending to supervise, the whole circus. Now, this road wasn't anything fancy. Just an old gravel stretch that had been there forever, a kind of access path running between my pasture and the new development. The kind of road you'd only use if you needed to get somewhere quiet, or if you'd taken a wrong turn. But apparently, the HOA decided it needed a makeover. They called it a community beautification project. Translation: we're spending too much money on something nobody asked for. So, I wandered over, coffee in hand, and asked one of the workers, "Hey, y'all got permission for this?" He shrugged, pointed to a woman in a white blouse and 2 high heels for a construction site. She looked like she'd stepped right out of a real estate ad. That was Linda, the HOA president. Linda had one of those smiles that said, "I'm being polite because people are watching." She turned toward me and said, "Good morning. Isn't this exciting? We're finally paving the main community road." I took a sip of coffee. "You mean my road?" She blinked. "Oh, no, this is community property." I raised an eyebrow. "You sure about that?" She crossed her arms, clearly used to being the boss. "According to our maps, this road connects the front gate to our neighborhood. So yes, community property." I just nodded slowly, trying not to laugh. "Ha! That's interesting, because I don't recall selling it." Her smile tightened like a knot. "Well, the developer handled all that years ago. Everything was properly transferred." "Uh-huh," I said, setting my cup on the fence post. "Mind if I check on that?" "Go right ahead," she said, turning back toward her clipboard. "You'll find we're completely in the right. Now, here's something you should know about me: I don't argue when I can prove." So, I drove into town that afternoon, straight to the county records office. The clerk, old guy named Benny, had known me since forever. I walked up to his desk and said, "Hey Benny, you still got the original plat maps for Silver Creek Estates?" He raised an eyebrow. "You in trouble again?" "Not yet," I said. "Just curious who owns that little strip of road between my pasture and the neighborhood." He chuckled. "Still causing trouble with them HOA folks, huh?" "Just trying to stay educated," I said. He disappeared into the back and came out a few minutes later with a dusty folder thicker than a Bible. "Here you go. Everything from the original subdivision filing." I laid it out on the counter, flipped through the pages, parcel maps, survey lines, legal descriptions. And there it was, that little strip of land running right along the border. Lot 7B, part of my original deed. No record of sale. No transfer. No easement recorded to the HOA or developer. Just my name, still printed there in faded ink. I stared at it for a good while, just letting it sink in. Then I found the actual deed in my own records at home, an old, yellowed piece of paper that smelled like dust in time. I ran my finger along the line describing the boundary. It was crystal clear. That road, the same one they were tearing up and paving, still belonged to me. I laughed out loud. Not the polite kind of laugh. The full "You've got to be kidding me" kind. All those HOA letters, all those rules they tried to push, and they were literally building their precious road on my land. I held the paper up to the light, squinting at it like it was a treasure map. "Well," I muttered, "that changes everything." Cue cinematic music, slow zoom on the deed, the edges glowing in the afternoon light. Because in that moment, I realized I had something better than revenge. I had leverage. Next morning, I drove by the site again. The workers were finishing up the first stretch of asphalt. Linda was there, looking pleased with herself, clipboard in hand like she was directing a movie. She saw me pull up and gave me a cheerful wave. I smiled back, held up the old deed, and said, "Hey, Linda, you might want to take a look at this before you go paving paradise." She frowned. "What's that?" I grinned. "Proof that you're paving my property." The look on her face was priceless. Half confusion, half panic, all entertainment. I tipped my hat, put my truck in gear, and drove off slow just to let that realization marinate. Because this wasn't just about a road anymore. This was about power and who really had it. You ever get one of those letters that just feels expensive? Thick paper, fancy logo, maybe even a gold embossed header that screams, "We mean business." Yeah. That's what showed up in my mailbox a few days after I waved that old deed in Linda's face. Envelope stamped urgent, HOA board notice. Which, in HOA language, means we're mad, but we'll pretend to be professional about it. I walked back up to the porch, tore it open, and started reading. "Dear Mr. Johnson," it began, "always a bad sign when they go formal. This letter serves as an official notice that the Silver Creek Estates Homeowners Association has determined the road in question to be community property. Any obstruction or denial of access will result in legal action." I snorted. Legal action? Over a road they don't even own? The letter went on for 2 full pages, words like encroachment, public utility easement, reasonable access, all the usual HOA buzzwords meant to sound scary. I finished reading, set the paper down, and said to myself, "Cute." 2 days later, I got another letter. This one was even longer, and in bold print it said, "Failure to comply may result in civil penalties." I swear they must have a full-time staff just to write threats. Then came the third letter, this time from an attorney representing the HOA. Now that one was good. Lots of fancy phrases like good faith negotiation and amicable resolution, followed by a casual threat about seeking immediate injunctive relief. I leaned back in my chair, looked out over the pasture, and thought, all right, if they want to play by the book, I'll just make sure they're reading the right one. Cut to community footage, HOA board meeting in progress. A week later, word got around that the HOA was holding a special board meeting to discuss the road situation. Now, I wasn't technically part of their HOA, but my name was on the land they were talking about. So naturally, I showed up. The meeting was in their little clubhouse, air-conditioned, perfectly decorated, smelled like lemon wipes and stress. Linda was up front, gavel in hand like she was the mayor of something important. Greg sat beside her, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. As soon as I walked in, heads turned. Half the room went quiet. The other half started whispering. Linda gave me that smile again. The kind that says, "We're pretending to be civil." "Ah, Mr. Johnson," she said. "Thank you for coming. We're discussing the right-of-way issue." "Right-of-way?" I said. "That's funny, because from what I read, there ain't one." A couple of homeowners chuckled. Linda didn't. She tapped the gavel. "Let's keep this professional, please." Then she launched into a long speech about community access, shared responsibility, and cooperation between neighboring parcels. I let her talk. I didn't interrupt. I just sat back, arms crossed, listening to her try and spin ownership out of thin air. After she finished, I stood up and said, "Appreciate the explanation, Linda. But here's the thing, the land's still mine. You can look at the county plat maps, the original deed, the whole stack of paperwork. It's all there. So unless y'all can show me something that says otherwise, I'm gonna have to ask you to stay off it." That set off a storm. People started talking over each other, one guy shouting about property values, another woman yelling something about common access rights. It was like a courtroom and a PTA meeting had a baby. Finally, Greg, bless him, tried to play mediator. "Look," he said, "maybe we can work something out. A temporary easement? Some kind of agreement?" I smiled. "Sure. We can talk about that. But not until you stop threatening me with lawyers." The room went dead silent. Linda glared at me, then at Greg, then at everyone else. You could almost see the steam coming out of her ears. Cut to exterior, rancher back home, evening light on the porch. I poured myself a drink, sat down, and looked at the growing stack of letters on my table. They really thought paperwork would scare me. Thing is, I've dealt with real problems, droughts, busted fences, coyotes in the pasture. Compared to that, an angry HOA was just noise. But I wasn't about to let them bulldoze me, literally or legally. So, I started to plan. Not out of anger, just logic. If they wanted to play by the book, I'd play smarter. I'd read the fine print, call the county surveyor, maybe even dig up the original developer's filings. Because if I'd learned anything from dealing with bureaucracy, it's that the person who knows the rules really knows them always wins. Voiceover, cinematic close-up of old maps spread across a table. They wanted to play by the book. They just didn't know I'd already read every page. Cinematic closing moment. Camera pans over the old deed, survey maps, and a cup of black coffee next to a dusty cowboy hat. The rancher smirks. Because while the HOA was busy filing papers, he was already writing the next chapter. There's a special kind of satisfaction in outsmarting someone who thinks they're the smartest person in the room. And that's exactly how this part of the story starts. After that storm of letters and board meetings, the HOA thought they had me cornered. They figured I'd cave, sign an easement, and let them have their shiny new road without a fuss. But what they didn't realize was that while they were busy talking, I was reading. A week later, I found myself back at the county records office. Same dusty room, same coffee-stained counter, same old Benny behind the desk. He looked up from his paperwork and grinned. Well, if it isn't the neighborhood troublemaker. I grinned back. Just doing a little research. You still got that development file we looked at? Benny reached under the counter, pulled out the old folder. You thinking of building something? I leaned on the counter. Something like that. I flipped through the pages again, this time slower. I wanted to see every line, every little note. And that's when I noticed something strange, a parcel ID I didn't recognize. Lot 7B, same one under the road, but there was an adjoining slice listed as unassigned. No owner on record. No tax payments in years. Just a forgotten remnant of the original subdivision plan. I pointed at it. What's this one here? Benny squinted. Looks like the developer filed it but never finalized the transfer. Happens sometimes when they mess up the legal description. Why? I smiled. Because I think it's sitting right under their fancy asphalt. Now, here's the thing about land laws, they're slow, confusing, and full of cracks. And if you know where those cracks are, you can slip right through them. That unclaimed parcel? It was technically still part of the original ranch boundary, the one from decades ago. The developer's transfer didn't include it because of a clerical error. Which meant it was up for reacquisition. So, I called my lawyer, good guy, quiet, the kind who smiles when he finds a loophole. Told him what I'd found. He chuckled and said, you know, if you file a claim of interest before anyone else notices, that land can revert to your ownership. I said, you serious? He said, as serious as County Ink. Cinematic montage, soft music, pen scratching, papers signing, the county seal stamping down hard. A week later, I was sitting in that same office again, but this time, with a pen in hand. All right, Mr. Johnson, said the clerk. Initial here, and sign at the bottom. I scrawled my name in thick black ink. The clerk flipped the page, pressed down a heavy stamp, thunk, the kind of sound that feels final. She smiled politely. Congratulations. You're now the legal owner of parcel 7B and its adjoining access strip. That was it. No fireworks, no trumpets, no dramatic music. Just that single, beautiful sound of a stamp hitting paper. But I'll tell you what, it sounded like victory. Cut to rancher back home, sunset, papers on the table, faint country music playing on the radio. I sat on my porch that evening, deed in hand, watching the sun drop behind the hills. They paved over my road. And now, technically speaking, I owned their pavement. It was quiet, poetic justice. The kind you don't brag about, you just know. I didn't tell a soul. Not even Benny. Not yet. Let them keep paving, keep driving, keep believing that asphalt was theirs. Because the thing about revenge, the best kind doesn't make noise. It just waits. Over the next few weeks, I watched from a distance as the HOA finished the project. New asphalt, fresh curbs, even fancy landscaping. They had a little ribbon-cutting ceremony. Linda gave a speech about community progress. I watched from my fence, smiling to myself. Progress, I muttered. Sure. Just make sure you're not standing on someone else's land while you celebrate it. A few days later, I got a notice in the mail, a property tax statement from the county. It listed both my parcels, including the newly added one. Right there in black and white. Owner, Samuel Johnson. Property description, private roadway, 0.42 acres. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just a win. This was checkmate. Voiceover, cinematic close-up of the stamped deed. They paved over my property. Now I owned their pavement. The camera lingers on the deed, a signature under soft light, the ink still fresh. A gust of wind flips the corner of the paper, revealing the legal description, Access Road, Silver Creek Estates. Then, fade to black. Cinematic closing line, voiceover. Sometimes revenge doesn't come with noise or fire. Sometimes it's just a piece of paper and the right name on the bottom line. There's a special kind of silence that comes right before a storm. That morning had that silence. I woke up, poured my coffee, and looked out toward the road. The same road the HOA had just finished paving, painting, and parading down like they'd built the Golden Gate Bridge. Except for one small detail, it wasn't theirs. And it was time they found that out. So I grabbed my toolbox, a post driver, and a shiny new sign I'd picked up the day before from the hardware store. Big, bold letters, impossible to miss. It said, "Private property, no trespassing, road use by permission only." Clean. Simple. Legal. I walked up to the entrance of the road, right where their little "Welcome to Silver Creek Estates" sign stood. And right next to it, I planted my own. A few hard swings, metal ringing against the post driver, and the sign was in the ground, gleaming in the morning sun like a sheriff's badge. I stepped back, admired my work, and thought, yeah, that ought to get their attention. Didn't take long. By noon, 3 SUVs had pulled up. Out came Linda, Greg, and another board member I didn't recognize, probably the HOA's legal expert or something. Linda stormed up to the gate, sunglasses on, heels clicking like gunfire. "What is this?" she demanded, pointing at the sign. I smiled. "That's what we call a boundary. You can't just put this here," she snapped. "This is a community road." I leaned against my truck, calm as ever. "Funny thing about that. See, I've got a little piece of paper that says otherwise." Greg looked like he'd swallowed a cactus. "You're joking." "Nope," I said. "Filed and stamped by the county clerk." "You're standing on private property." Linda crossed her arms. "This is ridiculous. You can't block access. We have homeowners who need this road. It's the only entrance." I nodded. "Sounds like a tough spot. Guess you'll have to talk to the owner about access." Her jaw dropped. "You are the owner." I grinned. Exactly. Within hours, the whole neighborhood was buzzing. Cars slowed down at the gate, drivers pointing and whispering. Someone took a picture of the sign and posted it on Facebook. By that evening, it had blown up on the local community group. Headline: Rancher blocks HOA road, legal showdown brewing in Silver Creek. Comments were wild. Good for him. HOAs are out of control. There's no way he can do that. I live there. We're trapped. Somebody get popcorn. Next day, I came out to find a small crowd gathered near the gate. HOA board members, a couple of homeowners, even a local news reporter with a camera crew. Linda was front and center, phone in hand, trying to look calm but failing miserably. "Mr. Johnson," she said, "you are interfering with community infrastructure." We're asking you, politely, to remove that sign. I tipped my hat. And I'm politely saying no. The reporter jumped in, smelling a story. Sir, is it true you own this road? I looked straight at the camera. That's right. They paved over my property without permission. So now, technically, they're driving on my asphalt. The reporter raised an eyebrow. And what are you planning to do about it? I smiled. Let's just say, I'm open to negotiation. Linda glared at me like she wanted to set me on fire with her eyes. You're holding the community hostage, she snapped. I shrugged. Nah. I'm just reminding y'all that private property means private. By sunset, things had gotten downright cinematic. Homeowners were gathered behind the gate, waving phones, filming the standoff. The HOA was on the phone with their lawyer. And me? I was leaning against my truck, calm as a pond. Every now and then, a resident would shout something like, "This is insane. We need to get to work." And I'd just say, talk to your HOA. They seem to make a lot of rules, maybe they can make you a new road. Of course, I wasn't heartless. I didn't actually block anyone in, the gate was open enough for cars to pass. But the sign was enough to send a message, the land had boundaries, and I wasn't backing down. The HOA wanted control. I wanted respect. And for the first time, the balance had shifted. That night, as the local news ran the story, HOA faces legal trouble over private road ownership, I sat on my porch with a cold drink, watching the headlights of residents cautiously driving past the sign. They slowed down every time, staring at the words like they were reading their future. And under my breath, I said it, the line I'd been waiting for. They called it a community road. I called it rent. Cinematic close, camera pans up from the sign to the stars above, slow guitar playing in the background. Voiceover. They said I couldn't fight the HOA. I didn't have to. I just changed the ground they stood on. You ever notice how quiet things get right before all hell breaks loose? That's what it felt like the morning I got the letter. Not a friendly letter this time, oh no. This one came in a thick white envelope with the words, "From the office of Smith & Walters, attorneys at law," printed across the top. I didn't even have to open it to know what it said. Inside was 3 pages of pure attitude. Legal terms stacked like bricks, every sentence ending in a threat. Cease and desist from obstructing the HOA's right of access. Failure to comply will result in immediate legal action. Our client asserts an implied easement over said roadway. I couldn't help but laugh. Implied easement, I muttered. That's lawyer talk for we forgot to do the paperwork. See, here's the thing about HOAs, they love to wave rules around until real law shows up. And this was about to become real law. So I called my lawyer, Tom Briggs, old ranch guy turned attorney. Wore boots to court and knew more about land rights than half the county combined. He picked up and said, "Let me guess. They lawyered up?" "Yup," I said. "Something about an implied easement." He chuckled. "Classic. Means they didn't record anything and now they're praying a judge will call it a mistake instead of what it really is, trespassing." "I figured as much," I said. "You want to have some fun?" "Always," he replied. Cut to montage, cinematic shots of Tom and the rancher flipping through files, maps, and old deeds in a dusty records room. We met at the county courthouse the next day. The records room smelled like old paper and coffee, my kind of place. Tom spread out the plats and deeds on a big oak table, tracing the borders with his finger. "See this," he said. "This line here? That's the original ranch boundary. The developer never subdivided this stretch properly." He pulled out another document, yellowed with age. "And here's where they messed up. No easement, no right-of-way, no access granted. They just built the road anyway." I leaned back in my chair. "So they've been driving over my land this whole time, illegally?" Tom nodded. "Pretty much. Every tire mark since that pavement went down is technically trespassing." I whistled low. "Well, I'll be damned." Tom grinned. They can cry implied easement all they want, but there's nothing implied about bad paperwork. He started copying records, snapping photos with his phone, marking dates and parcel numbers. This right here, he said, pointing to the developer's signature line, is your gold. They never filed a transfer, never registered the easement, and the county can confirm it. I said, you think the HOA knows that? Oh, they'll know soon enough, he said. Cut to HOA office, Linda pacing, phone to her ear, frustrated voices in the background. Word spread fast. The HOA had sent out an emergency email to all residents. We are taking immediate legal steps to resolve the situation regarding the entrance road. Please remain calm. Remain calm, of course, meant we're panicking but trying to sound professional. Back at my ranch, I watched their lawyer's car drive up to the gate. A polished black SUV with a vanity plate that screamed billable hours. Out stepped a man in a suit way too shiny for a dirt road. He gave me a stiff smile and said, Mr. Johnson, I'm here on behalf of the Silver Creek Estates HOA. We believe this road constitutes an implied easement of access. I grinned. You believe that, huh? Yes, he said confidently. The road has been in use for years. That establishes historical access. Right, I said. But see, there's a difference between using something and owning it. You can borrow my shovel, but that doesn't make it yours. He frowned. The association is prepared to take this to court. I shrugged. Then I'll see you there. Just make sure to bring your maps and a ruler. Cut to cinematic scene, courtroom documents, survey maps on a table, Tom highlighting old county filings. Over the next week, we built our case like a fortress. We had old photos of the land before development, tax receipts proving continuous ownership, and the cherry on top, the original deed showing no recorded easement, ever. Tom looked up from the paperwork and said, they built their kingdom on borrowed ground. I smiled. Then I guess it's time the landlord sent a notice. The HOA doubled down, of course. They sent more letters, more threats, even a cease and desist to my lawyer's office. Didn't matter. The law was on our side, and for once, I had the paperwork that made them sweat. Every time I saw Linda drive past the sign, her face looked tighter. Like the road was suddenly heavier under her tires. Voiceover, slow zoom on the stamped deed and survey map. They thought they could bury me in paperwork. But I had something stronger, proof. Beat. They built their kingdom on borrowed ground. Closing cinematic moment, soft thunder rumbling in the distance, the road stretching through the rancher's land. The storm was coming, and for the first time, I wasn't the one bracing for it. I was waiting for it. You ever watch a fire spread, not the kind with flames, but with emails? That's what the next few days felt like. It started with one urgent message from the HOA president, Linda. Subject line, important update regarding entrance road situation. By noon, it had turned into an all-out digital stampede, reply all chaos. Everybody had an opinion, and half of them were yelling in all caps. Cut to close-up, laptop screen blowing, notifications dinging non-stop. One homeowner wrote. Wait, are you saying the HOA doesn't own the road? Another replied. How could this happen? We paid dues for this. Then someone else jumped in. So, we've been trespassing this whole time? By 3 p.m., the email thread had 87 messages. By sunset, people were calling for Linda's resignation. Meanwhile, I was sitting on my porch, coffee in hand, watching the parade of SUVs roll past, board members, lawyers, even some folks I hadn't seen since the last bake sale. They all had that same look, panic disguised as purpose. I didn't need to say a word. The truth was doing all the talking. Cut to HOA clubhouse, fluorescent lights buzzing, residents packed inside. They called an emergency meeting. That's HOA talk 4, we're losing control. Linda stood at the front, trying to keep her voice calm. We're aware of certain misunderstandings regarding the ownership of the entrance road, she said, clutching her notes. It appears there may have been a clerical error in the original development records. Someone from the back shouted, a clerical error? We've been driving over someone else's property. The room erupted. One guy yelled, "You told us we owned it." Another lady waved her phone and said, "The news is already talking about it." Linda's smile wobbled. "Please, let's stay civil," she said, but no one was listening anymore. Cut to exterior shot, news van pulls up at the gate, camera crew setting up. Yup. The local news caught wind of it. Somebody must have tipped them off, because next thing I knew, a reporter was standing by the private property, no trespassing sign with a mic in hand. "Tonight at 6, she said into the camera, a neighborhood feud over road ownership takes a shocking turn when one rancher discovers the HOA may have been paving over his land. You can't buy that kind of entertainment." I stayed out of it. Didn't give interviews, didn't wave my arms, didn't gloat. Just sat on my porch, dog by my side, and watched the circus unfold. Neighbors started driving slower past my gate, like they were afraid the ground might suddenly vanish under their wheels. Cut to HOA email montage, frantic typing, phones ringing, people arguing. Linda tried to contain it, sending out another message. "We are working diligently with our legal team to resolve this matter amicably." But by then, the damage was done. The whispers had turned into rumors, and the rumors had turned into full-blown conspiracy theories. Some folks said I forged the deed. Others said the HOA board had been pocketing funds. One guy swore the whole neighborhood was built on cursed land. I didn't have to lift a finger, the truth was doing laps around them. Cut to Linda in her driveway, on the phone, pacing. You could see the stress in her face. I almost felt bad for her, almost. From what I heard, the vice president of the HOA quit the board that week. 3 members stopped showing up to meetings entirely. And a few residents started whispering about dissolving the HOA altogether. One even came by my fence and said, "Hey, we didn't know they were doing all that." No hard feelings, right? I smiled. No hard feelings. Just boundaries. He laughed awkwardly and drove off. Cinematic beat, slow pan from the rancher's porch to the chaotic community gate. You could hear the arguing echoing all the way down the road, people pointing, waving papers, reporters snapping photos. It was like watching a storm tear down its own clouds. I leaned back in my chair, took another sip of coffee, and said quietly, I didn't need revenge. The truth was doing that for me. Closing voiceover, calm tone, twilight setting. They thought they could bury me in paperwork and meetings. Turns out, they buried themselves instead. No lawsuits, no shouting, no grand revenge plan. Just one signed deed and a little patience. Sometimes, you don't have to fight back loud. You just have to let the truth echo long enough. And watch what it does. After a week of chaos, I figured the HOA would cool off. Maybe take the loss quietly, patch up their pride, and move on. But nope. These folks don't back down, not when there's money, image, or authority on the line. So when a shiny black SUV rolled up to my gate one morning, I already knew what it was. Out stepped Linda, the HOA president herself, flanked by her lawyer and a man in a blazer who looked like he hadn't smiled since the 90s. Linda waved. "Morning, Mr. Johnson. We were hoping we could talk." I took a slow sip of my coffee. "You're talking dot." Cut to wide shot, all standing by the gate, tension thick but polite. She cleared her throat. "The board has decided to make you a formal offer for the land under the road. We're prepared to resolve this matter amicably." Amicably, I said. That's lawyer talk for cheaply, isn't it? Her lawyer handed me an envelope. Inside was a typed offer, neat, official, and insulting. They wanted to buy the land for what they called nominal compensation, basically, a few $1,000 and a pat on the back. I couldn't help but laugh. "Lady, you've got homeowners paying more than that for a fancy fence." Linda smiled tight. "Well, it's just a small strip of land." We assumed. "That small strip," I interrupted, "is your road. Your only road." You could see the lawyer's jaw tighten. I let the silence sit for a moment, the sound of wind, a bird calling, and somewhere far off, a hammer echoing from the construction site. Then I said, "You want the land? Pay fair market value." Linda frowned. That's excessive. Or, I continued, you can sign a lease. 99 years. $1 per vehicle per day. Her eyes went wide. That's ridiculous. I shrugged. You're free to use the dirt path around back if you'd rather. The lawyer cut in, voice sharp. You're trying to extort a community. I smiled. Nah. I'm just charging rent. Cut to cinematic shot, Linda storming back to her SUV, papers flapping in the wind. They left without shaking hands. Didn't even say goodbye. And for a minute, I thought that'd be the end of it. But sure enough, that evening I got another email, this time from the HOA's negotiation committee. They respectfully declined my terms. Their reasoning? The HOA cannot set a precedent for paying inflated prices for land already dedicated to public use. Public use. I nearly spit out my drink. There's nothing public about my deed. Cut to rancher in his workshop, toolbox open, sun rising through the window. So I decided to make the situation clearer. Early the next morning, before the HOA board even had their first meeting, I drove my truck down to the property line. Loaded in the back were metal posts, a roll of fencing wire, and a few bright orange barricades I'd picked up from a local surplus yard. I started laying them out across the middle of the road, slow, steady, deliberate. Every clang of a post hitting dirt sounded like punctuation in a sentence that said, I warned you. By the time the sun was fully up, I had half the road fenced off. One lane open, one lane closed. Just enough to make a point. Within an hour, I saw brake lights stacking up from the gate to the clubhouse. People leaning out windows, horns honking, phones in hand. I could practically hear Linda's phone melting from all the calls. Cut to HOA clubhouse, chaos, phones ringing, residents shouting. Linda stood there red-faced, waving her arms. This is illegal. He can't do this. Someone from the back muttered, well, technically he can. Another homeowner said, can't we just pay him what he wants? Linda snapped, we can't reward bad behavior. I just smiled when I heard that part later. Because, funny thing, I hadn't misbehaved. I just owned the land under their tires. Cut back to the rancher's porch, calm tone, distant sound of chaos from the community. That evening, I sat watching headlights crawl down the single open lane like ants. It was quiet out on my side of the fence. Peaceful, even. The HOA had spent weeks trying to control me. Now they were the ones trapped by their own road. Voiceover, soft instrumental playing, camera pans over the sunrise hitting the new barricade. I didn't build that fence out of anger. I built it out of principle. If they weren't going to respect the truth, then they were gonna have to drive through it. They wanted to pressure me into folding. Instead, I gave them something they couldn't ignore, a line in the dirt, both legal and literal. Closing cinematic moment, drone shot rising above the barricaded road, sunlight washing over it. Sometimes, the only way to make people see the value of what they take for granted is to block their way to it. You ever notice how people only start paying attention when it affects their morning commute? That's what finally happened. For weeks, most of the neighbors had been watching from a distance, shaking their heads, whispering about that ranch guy who fenced the road. But now that they were waiting in a 20-car line just to get out of the subdivision, suddenly, everyone wanted to know the truth. And when they found it, well, let's just say the story started to sound a whole lot different. Cut to montage, screenshots of local Facebook groups, text threads, and HOA forum posts flying across the screen. At first, the online chatter was chaos. Half the neighborhood was mad at me. The other half was mad at the HOA. And a small group was just mad there was nowhere to park their golf carts anymore. But then one guy posted a screenshot of the county deed map. It showed, plain as daylight, that the road cut right through my land. Caption read. Turns out he wasn't lying. HOA never filed the easement. That post went viral in the local group within hours. By the end of the day, people weren't calling me stubborn anymore. They were calling me smart. Cut to a clip, local news anchor speaking on TV. The Silver Creek Estates HOA faces mounting criticism after documents revealed the neighborhood's main road was built on private property without proper legal easement. The landowner, a longtime rancher, says he simply wants fair compensation. They made it sound almost heroic. Me, the local landowner, standing up for property rights. I couldn't help but grin. I didn't need to fight the HOA anymore, the public was doing it for me. Cut to HOA clubhouse, fluorescent lights, tense board meeting. Linda tried to do damage control. She called a meeting, packed with angry homeowners demanding answers. One guy stood up, waving a printout. "Why didn't you check the records before you built the road?" Another shouted, "You said the land was already ours." Linda stammered, "We believed it was." The developer assured. Someone cut her off. "You believed? That's your excuse?" The meeting went downhill fast. 2 board members walked out halfway through. Another resigned the next morning. By Friday, the HOA's so-called leadership team looked like a ghost crew. Cut to exterior shot, residents chatting near the gate, calmer tone. That weekend, something strange happened. Neighbors who used to glare at me started waving again. A few even stopped by the fence. One older couple brought pie, said they wanted to hear my side of the story. I told them the truth, I didn't do it for revenge. I just wanted fairness. The old man nodded and said, "Can't blame you for that. They've been running this place like their own little kingdom." That's when I realized the tide had turned. Montage, clips of social media videos, drone shots, and news snippets. Someone posted drone footage of my barricade with the caption, "The HOA paved over his land. He just drew the line back." That video blew up. Comments poured in from everywhere, folks saying things like, "Legend. That's how you stand up to power. Team Rancher." I never planned to be anybody's hero, but apparently, it was too late for that. Cut to HOA office, Linda alone, phone buzzing non-stop. Meanwhile, Linda was drowning. Her phone was ringing off the hook, reporters, residents, even the developer's old lawyer calling to distance themselves from the mess. She sent out one last desperate email to the neighborhood. "We are exploring all legal avenues to reclaim control of the road and ensure the safety of our residents." But nobody was buying it anymore. Because when power crumbles, the cracks show who was real and who was just loud. Cut to rancher's porch, calm evening light, the sound of crickets. I watched it all from my porch, coffee in one hand, phone in the other, scrolling through comments. Folks I'd never met were defending me online. News anchors were calling it a land rights lesson. And the HOA? They were spinning in circles, trying to rewrite a story the world had already decided on. I didn't gloat. Didn't post memes or victory videos. I just smiled and thought, funny how the truth travels faster than a lawsuit. Voiceover, soft, reflective tone over sunset visuals. I'd started this fight thinking it'd be me against them. Turns out, once the truth got out, I didn't have to lift another finger. The public had seen enough and they'd already picked their side. Closing cinematic line, drone pulls back over the road, the ranch fence shining in the sunset. When power crumbles, the cracks show who was real. And who was just loud. After weeks of chaos, emails, barricades, and news coverage, it was finally clear, the HOA was running out of options. The public was against them. Their board was fractured. And their lawyers, well, they weren't exactly thrilled about billing hours for a losing case. So, one quiet morning, I got a call from Tom, my lawyer. "Ready to settle?" he asked, casual as ever. "Depends," I said. "How generous are they feeling today?" Tom chuckled. "We'll see." Cut to HOA office, tense atmosphere, the board gathered around a table. Linda looked tired. Her hair a little frazzled, posture stiff. The lawyer was shuffling papers nervously. They'd drafted a settlement proposal, basically a thinly disguised attempt to buy my compliance. But it didn't include any real protection for me. I read it carefully, highlighted the weak spots, and sent it back with revisions. Acknowledge rancher ownership of the entire disputed road parcel. Legal lease or purchase agreement with fair compensation if needed. Clause explicitly stating no HOA jurisdiction over ranch property, now or in the future. I wasn't here to negotiate for fun, I was here to make sure the problem never came back. Cut to cinematic montage, signing table, pens moving, papers stamped, law books stacked nearby. A week later, we met in a neutral office downtown. The HOA lawyers looked grim. The board members were restless, shuffling papers like kids trying not to get caught. I sat across from them, calm. Tom by my side, looking over every signature line. Here's the final agreement, he said, sliding the folder across the table. Linda picked up the first document, glanced at it, then sighed. Fine, she said. We agree to these terms. She signed. Her lawyer signed. The rest of the board signed, some reluctantly, some with shaky pens. Finally, Tom slid the folder to me. I signed. Sealed it. And just like that, the war, at least on paper, was over. Cut to rancher's porch, slow pan of the sun glinting on the fence and the road. I leaned back, took a sip of coffee, and watched the sunlight reflect off the freshly paved road. The barricades were gone, traffic flowing smoothly, residents cautiously driving past the sign that still read private property. It felt strange, peaceful. For once, the fight had ended not with yelling, not with threats, but with something cleaner, law, clarity, and the truth. Cut to lawyer handing over the final signed document, close up on ink signatures and official stamps. Tom handed me the folder. Congratulations. You own it. And they can't touch it ever again. I nodded. That's what I wanted. He smiled. You got more than ownership. You got peace. I laughed softly. Yeah. Peace and proof that patience beats panic every time. Cut to cinematic wide shot, the rancher walking along the road, sunset behind the hills. The deal included everything I needed. Legal recognition, protection against future HOA overreach, and the quiet satisfaction of having stood my ground. Neighbors waved as they drove past, the tension easing from the street like morning fog burning off. Some of them even stopped to say thanks. They didn't have to, the documents spoke louder than words ever could. Voiceover, calm, reflective tone, camera tracking along the fence and road. They wanted control. I wanted peace. In the end, I got both. No gloating. No revenge plans. Just closure. The road was mine. The land was mine. And the neighborhood had learned sometimes ownership isn't just about titles. It's about patience, preparation, and standing up when the moment calls for it. Closing cinematic beat, drone shot rising above the road, the sun dipping behind the hills, shadows long, calm music playing. I walked back to the porch, coffee in hand, and let the quiet settle. The war was over. And for once, everything was exactly where it belonged. The dust from the battle had settled, but the echoes of it lingered. Silver Creek Estates wasn't the same neighborhood it had been before the deed, the barricades, or the public standoff. For starters, Linda, the HOA president, resigned. Officially, she cited personal reasons. Unofficially, everyone knew the truth: she couldn't lead a board whose credibility had crumbled under the weight of a simple piece of paper. Board members shuffled out, some quietly, some muttering under their breath. A few tried to cling to authority, but it was like trying to hold water in your hands. Cut to HOA office, residents meeting, new leadership taking notes. With the old board gone, the neighborhood had to start fresh. They called a meeting, this time focused on accountability. Bylaws were rewritten, clearer rules established, and most importantly, they included language making sure future road projects would require proper easements before a single shovel hit dirt. One resident joked, "At least now they can't pave over anyone's backyard without permission." I smiled quietly from the back of the room. Change had a way of sneaking in after chaos. Cut to rancher walking along the edge of his property, slow motion, morning light on the grass and fence. The land I'd fought for, the road and the surrounding parcels, had become more than just property. Neighbors started waving as they drove past. Not because they owed me anything, but because respect had replaced suspicion. Some stopped to chat. One brought coffee. Another, a plate of cookies. I accepted them politely. Didn't gloat. Didn't bring up the fences or the emails or the news headlines. Because the lesson was clear, sometimes, standing your ground speaks louder than words ever could. Cinematic montage, repairs, reconciliations, quiet mornings. A handyman fixing the old streetlights along the main road, nodding as I passed. Neighbors chatting amicably at the gate, now a proper turnaround point instead of a standoff zone. Dogs barking in yards, kids riding bikes down streets that no longer carry tension in their asphalt. Me, leaning on my porch railing, coffee in hand, watching the sun rise over the hills. Life had returned to a rhythm, calm and unhurried. The neighborhood had learned. And so had I. Cut to close-up, the private property sign still standing, morning dew glinting on the letters. It wasn't a threat anymore. It was a reminder, a symbol of ownership, patience, and standing firm when it mattered. And in a way, it had become part of the neighborhood story. People didn't just see the land, they saw the principle it represented. Voiceover, reflective, calm tone. Sometimes you don't need to fight loud. Just own the ground they stand on. The words weren't just about the road. They were about respect, boundaries, and knowing your worth. Neighbors who once doubted me now nodded as I passed. HOA leadership learned humility, and the community, messy and human as it was, learned to think before they paved. Closing cinematic shot, drone rising above the ranch, the road stretching past the property, sunlight spilling across the hills. The standoff was over. The headlines had faded. The barricades were gone. And for the first time in weeks, there was only quiet. A quiet that felt like victory. A quiet that felt like home. From above, everything looks simple. A straight line of asphalt, winding through green fields, quiet fences, and rolling hills. But from ground level, you know the story it tells. The battles fought, the letters sent, the meetings, the barricades, the late nights spent digging through dusty county records. It's easy to forget that every stretch of road, every inch of land, carries meaning. Not just to those who drive on it, but to those who own it truly, legally, and morally. Cut to slow-motion shots, cows grazing near the fence, a pickup truck rolling down the now peaceful road, neighbors waving from their yards. They paved over my property without permission. They thought a title, a committee, and a few signatures on HOA paperwork gave them control. But they forgot one thing: real power doesn't come from a board seat, a gavel, or a couple of polite threats. It comes from knowing what's yours, understanding the rules, and protecting it. Cinematic close-up, the rancher's hand brushing against the edge of the private property sign, morning dew glinting faintly despite the sunset glow. I didn't set out to make a scene. I didn't need drama, headlines, or to humiliate anyone. I set out to do one thing: stand my ground. And in doing so, I learned that patience is its own weapon. Knowledge is its own shield. And sometimes, quiet action can move mountains louder than any shouting match ever could. Cut to cinematic montage, aerial view of the road, the fence, the ranch house, the horizon turning from gold to deep orange. The road stretches smoothly, legally, and peacefully across my land. The barricades are gone, but their memory lingers as a lesson. Neighbors wave not out of fear, but out of respect. The community has grown a little wiser, a little humbler. It's funny how the smallest piece of land can teach the biggest lessons. Voiceover, calm, reflective, cinematic tone over the sunset. They paved over my property without permission. But they forgot one thing: power doesn't come from a title or a board seat. It comes from knowing what's yours and protecting it. A few weeks, a few documents, a little patience. That was all it took. Final cinematic one-liner, camera tilts down from the sky to the road, golden light bathing every detail. They thought they owned the road until I bought the dirt beneath it. The sun dips lower, the shadows stretch, and the ranch sits in quiet triumph. No fanfare. No gloating. Just the land, the road, and the satisfaction of knowing the fight was fair and won. Closing drone shot, camera slowly rises, pulling back to show the road fading into the horizon, the sky streaked with oranges and purples. And in that moment, it's clear, standing your ground doesn't require anger, shouting, or chaos. Sometimes it just requires knowing your rights and having the courage to claim what's yours.